Hello everyone. Thank you for your understanding, given that we have had to cancel Monday and Wednesday of this week. I had a skiing accident this weekend and am still recovering from that. I plan to be in on Friday. So this video is intended to complete the section 3.12 and 2.1 of your text. So we will continue finishing up defining different types of crimes. And I just wanted to remind you that when we were last in class, we had talked about the 4 different types of homicide, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, voluntary manslaughter, and involuntary manslaughter. So first-degree murder includes premeditation and malice. Second-degree murder includes no premeditation, but does involve malice. Voluntary manslaughter does not involve premeditation or malice, and involuntary manslaughter is unintentional. So with those little reminders, I wanted to pose a couple of examples to see if you could apply the information that you have learned to specific cases. And so we will go through these now. I will give you the answers in this video, but try to come up with the answer prior to me telling you. So the first case, Mark comes home to find his partner in bed with Jesus. In the heat of the moment, Mark picks up a baseball bat from next to the bed and strikes Jesus in the head, killing him instantly. So think about what type of homicide that would fall under. First degree, second degree, voluntary, or involuntary manslaughter. The second case, Liz is fired from her job. Distraught, she heads to the bar. After having 5 drinks, Liz drives home at twice the posted speed limit. Liz hits and kills a pedestrian while driving intoxicated. So again, of the 4 types of homicide, which one would that be? Take a second to think about those 2. So in this case, number 1 with Mark, that is considered a voluntary manslaughter. Likely this would fall under that because this would be considered a heat of passion. So it's an event that he encountered that any reasonable person would experience an extreme emotion. The second one is involuntary manslaughter. In this instance, the killing was unintentional, that she did not have the intention to go out and kill a pedestrian. So that's why that would be considered involuntary manslaughter. Next 2 examples. Number 3, Paul is seeking revenge on a rival gang member, Alex. Paul waits across the street from Alex's house with a clear line of sight to his front door. When Alex comes out of his house, Paul shoots and kills Alex. So think about which type of homicide that would be. First degree, second degree, voluntary, or involuntary. And number 4, Monique and Candace are neighbors, and lately they've been having disagreements over the fence between their properties. Candace pays Monique a visit to discuss the matter, but gets angry in the process, pulls out a gun, and shoots and kills Candace. So take a second to think about those 2 and try to determine which one of the 4 types of homicide these cases would be. For number 3 with Paul, this would be classified as first-degree murder because in this case it involves premeditation and deliberation and malice. So he had purposely planned in advance to complete this crime. And then number 4 with Monique and Candace, this would be considered second-degree murder. So if you have any questions on those, please let me know and I can answer those in class. So moving on to some additional violent crime classifications. We are now going to cover the definition of assault, and there are two types of assault: aggravated assault and simple assault. So any type of assault, aggravated or simple assault, is an unlawful attack upon another person in which the purpose is to injure the other person. So an aggravated assault is generally when there is serious injuries sustained. So many times that includes the use of a weapon. So aggravated assault, there is severe injury, and usually there is a weapon involved. Now, please note that if this was the intention of someone's actions, that they purposely were trying to produce serious harm, if the victim ends up dying, that is not considered aggravated assault. Instead, that would be considered second-degree murder. Okay? So then, the difference between aggravated assault and simple assault would be, as in simple assault, the victim usually doesn't sustain serious injuries, and generally there isn't a weapon involved. In this case, just to remind you again of some of the different terms that we've covered, actus reus is the actual act or physical aspect of a crime, and so engaging in an attack upon someone is actus reus. Within the state of New York, aggravated assaults and simple assaults are generally categorized as felonies. So again, felonies are eligible for incarceration for more than a year in a prison. The next thing that we will define are different violent offenses that contain sexual offenses. So the first of which that we will define under this is rape, and then the second one is sexual assault. So we'll talk about the ways in which crime is measured in the next section, but one of the ways in which data on crime is collected is by the Uniform Crime Report, and so we'll talk about that in the next chapter. But what's something that's interesting about the ways in which the United States have collected data on crime is that the definition of rape has changed throughout time. So the way in which it's now defined is that there is sexual intercourse, so that involves some type of penetration without consent. Up until 2013, the Uniform Crime Reports only took the definition of rape as being relevant to female victims. So it was up until 2013, rape only included female victims. And so now that has since changed. So after 2013, this includes any person, not just women. So the definition and the difference between rape and sexual assault is that sexual assault does not involve intercourse. So there is no intercourse in defining sexual assault. Under both of these, it is quite possible that the force of threat is common, or there's actual force, and so that is why these are categorized as violent crimes. There can be different degrees of these violent crimes of rape and sexual assault, and the severity of the actual act is indicated by the degree or the classification. And so within the state of New York, depending on that severity, sexual assault may be categorized as a misdemeanor or a felony, but rape is categorized as a felony. So again, misdemeanors can have punishments from a fine to up to 1 year in jail, whereas felonies have more than a year in prison. Another type of violent crime that you should know is robbery, and there are a handful of people that tend to use the terms robbery and burglary interchangeably, and so just be sure to pay attention so that you know the difference between robbery and burglary, and we'll talk about burglary momentarily. So robbery includes or involves theft and interpersonal violence. Because there is violence, that is why it's considered a violent crime and not just a property crime. So robbery is when an individual attempts or actually does take an item or something from another individual, and that could be done through using force, so that's why it's considered a violent crime, the threat of force or the threat of violence, so again, violent crime, or by putting the victim in fear. Robbery is considered a felony in the state of New York. Additional property crime classifications include burglary and larceny. So again, be sure to know the difference between robbery and burglary and larceny. So the crimes that we have covered so far were all violent crimes. So that included the 4 different definitions of homicide. That included rape, sexual assault, and robbery. So now moving on to property crimes, we have burglary and larceny. So again, burglary and robbery are sometimes used incorrectly, interchangeably. But burglary is when an individual enters some kind of structure, whether it's a home or a business, and they are doing so to commit a theft. So in burglary, that is categorized as burglary when there is no force used. So if, for example, an individual breaks into a store after it has closed, that involves unlawful entry because they were in a store when they weren't supposed to be. So if they steal something, that would be considered burglary. If you're out of town and someone breaks into your house and steals some belongings of yours, that is considered burglary because you did not give them the right to be in your home when they completed a theft. Larceny, on the other hand, involves theft, but it is more stealthy, and an individual doesn't necessarily have to be in a structure unlawfully for it to happen. So there's a handful of different types of larceny theft. So that could be pickpocketing. So for example, if tourists are out and about and an individual stealthily takes a wallet from someone's pocket, that would be considered larceny theft. So they're not necessarily using force, and they technically are able to be in a public area with other people. So that's why it wouldn't be considered a robbery or a burglary. Another example of larceny theft would be is that if an individual steals something from a store while it's open, that would be a larceny theft because the store is open. The individual has a right to be in the store as a customer. So that would why they're not in there unlawfully, so that's why it's a larceny theft. If you have a friend over at your house and you come to find something of yours missing and you find out that they have stolen it, that would be larceny. It would not be burglary because you gave them the right to be in your home. So in all of these examples of property crimes with burglary, larceny, and then we'll cover a couple more. Property crimes generally have some kind of theoretically, goal to enhance an offender's financial status. So it could be that monetary gain or a possession is gained. And even though we haven't talked about all the different types of larceny, so I had mentioned pickpocketing, that could be purse snatching, it could be theft from someone's vehicle, bicycle theft. So, and those I just wanted to throw out there for other examples. But that is the definitions of both burglary and larceny. And generally, again, there are different classifications of severity, but more often than not, burglary in New York is a felony, whereas larceny theft is considered, it could be a misdemeanor or a felony, depending upon the severity or the classification. So some more property crime classifications. The last two that we will cover are motor vehicle theft and arson. So in these cases, again, these are property crimes that don't necessarily involve violence. Motor vehicle theft, not surprisingly, is when an individual is attempting to steal a vehicle. Interestingly, in many definitions, it does not include boats, farming equipment, airplanes, or construction equipment. So when motor vehicle theft is committed, it generally includes cars, trucks, SUVs, motorcycles, buses, snowmobiles, things like that. So motor vehicle, that it's an attempted or completed theft of a vehicle. As for arson, this would be a willful or malicious burning or attempting to burn some kind of house. It could be any other structure, a building, anything like that. In instances for crime data to count that an arson has occurred, it has to be a proved fire, so not one with a suspicious origin. So arson, intentionally starting a fire, not suspicious, but that it was proved to be an arson. You may have seen some cases where individuals will commit arson in an attempt to gain insurance money on their home, for example. So that's just one example. In these two cases, again, bringing them back to some of the topics we've talked about earlier, the actus reus and mens reus. So actus reus example in motor vehicle theft is the actual act of taking a motor vehicle. So it's the theft is the actus reus. And with arson, something that points out in the definition as the aspect of mens rea of a crime is malicious burning. So if someone in their mind has a malicious intent, so it's not accidental, but maliciously burning something, that would be the mens rea aspect of a crime of arson. Motor vehicle theft could be a misdemeanor or a felony in the state of New York. It, again, depends on the classification. And with arson in New York, it's usually a felony. So that concludes section 3.12 and 2.1. If you have any questions, please let me know.